Welcome to the TokyoBill Weekly. Stories from Japan, told from Japan. This week, Japan is drinking less, and the country that invented the after-work drinking party is quietly trying to figure out what comes next. I should say up front that I run a craft beer bar directory covering Tokyo and the surrounding prefectures. So when I tell you that Japan is drinking less, I'm not exactly a disinterested observer. But the numbers are the numbers, and they're worth paying attention to. This week, Japan's major brewers, Asahi, Kirin, Sapporo, and Suntory, expanded their zero-proof and low-alcohol lineups, with the Japan Times reporting that the companies believe many young consumers still want to enjoy the atmosphere of a drinking party while avoiding alcohol. I find that interesting. The biggest beer companies in Japan are now explicitly designing products for people who want to be at a drinking party without drinking. That is a fairly significant statement about where the market is heading. Let's back up and look at how Japan got here. Japan has one of the most developed and distinctive drinking cultures in the world, not just in the sense that people drink, but in the sense that drinking was built into the structure of professional and social life in ways that had no real equivalent in most other countries. The key word is nomikai, drinking gathering, and for much of the post-war era, it was effectively compulsory. The roots of nomikai run deep. Shared drinking as a way to build trust and connection has been part of Japanese social life for centuries, from sake offered at shrines to the banquet culture of the samurai era. But the modern version, the after-work drinking session at an izakaya, the year-end bonenkai, the welcome party for a new hire, was a product of Japan's post-war economic boom, when lifetime employment and the senpai and kohai hierarchy were the central organizing principles of the workplace. The concept even has its own portmanteau, nominication, a blend of nomu, to drink, and communication. The idea was not subtle. Real conversations happened over alcohol. Hierarchy softened. A junior employee who wanted to know how they were actually regarded by their manager did not ask in a formal meeting. They went to the izakaya and watched the third round of drinks do the work. Attendance was not officially mandatory. It was simply the kind of thing whose repeated absence could quietly shape your career trajectory in ways nobody would ever say out loud. At its peak in the bubble era of the 1980s, the nomikai was an institution. Corporate warriors worked long hours and headed straight to bars. The concept of moving from the first venue to the second to a third became so embedded in city life that infrastructure adapted around it. Capsule hotels for those who missed the last train. Late-night ramen shops for the salaryman crowd at 2 a.m. It was a social system, and alcohol was its operating mechanism. That system is now visibly unwinding, and the speed at which it's happening is the thing most worth paying attention to. Not long ago, roughly 3/4 of Japanese workplaces held some form of nomikai. That figure has since dropped to around 60%, with year-end party rates falling further still, from more than 3/4 of companies hosting bonenkai a few years ago to under 60% today. A large survey of workers found that nearly 2/3 now view nominication as unnecessary. Around 80% consider pressuring a colleague to attend a drinking party or criticizing a non-drinker to be a form of workplace harassment, formally recognized as nomihara, drinking harassment, under Japan's power harassment prevention law. The generational picture is more nuanced than the headline suggests. Contrary to what you might expect, younger workers are not the most resistant to nomikai. That distinction belongs to people in their 40s and 50s, who are more likely than their junior colleagues to find them exhausting and fraught with risk. What younger workers are rejecting is not connection with colleagues. It's the specific format of mandatory after-hours alcohol consumption as the price of being considered a team player. A Japanese writer who researched the question found what he described as the real reason most people decline nomikai. Not, "I don't want to bond with coworkers," but something called ki wo tsukau, the exhausting mental effort of managing impressions and navigating hierarchy even outside of work hours. Nomikai was supposed to be the place where you stopped performing. For many, it had become one more setting where the performance continued, just with beer. Underneath the cultural shift is a harder set of numbers. A survey by a Tokyo marketing firm found that 44% of Japanese people in their 20s abstain from alcohol entirely, with a further 16% drinking less than once a month. Combined, that's 6 in 10 young Japanese adults consuming little to no alcohol. Beer consumption has been falling consistently through recent summers, in the season when it was historically supposed to be at its strongest. Total alcohol consumption in Japan has been falling since its peak at the turn of the century, and the decline has accelerated in recent years. Research using panel data across nearly a decade found that the trend predates the pandemic and reflects deeper cultural changes: rising health consciousness, economic anxiety, and a generation more exposed to health-focused messaging than any that came before. The reasons young people give for not drinking are telling. Around a third say there's no particular reason. A quarter cite low tolerance. About the same proportion say they can have a perfectly good time without alcohol. And roughly 1 in 5 simply don't like the taste. A smaller number say their friends don't drink either, a detail that points towards something self-reinforcing. When the social norm shifts, it shifts in groups. Japan's beer industry saw this coming earlier than most. Kirin launched its first 0.0 beer in 2009. Suntory followed in 2010, Sapporo in 2011. A full decade before the non-alcoholic beer category became a serious market in most Western countries. The competitive intensity of Japanese brewing had produced a particular discipline for product development, and the companies applied it to alcohol-free products with the same seriousness they brought to their alcoholic lines. Kirin's Karada Free carries health claims about reducing visceral fat. Asahi Healthy Style markets itself as moderating the rise in blood triglyceride levels after meals. These are not soft drinks dressed up as beer. They are products designed to be chosen in the same moment and the same setting as alcoholic beer, by people who want the experience without the effect. One analyst put it simply: Asahi, Suntory, Kirin, from tea to beer to non-alcoholic beverages, they cover everything. As long as they can provide what the audience is demanding, they can still benefit from it. The drinks change, the companies remain. There is a detail from the early days of non-alcoholic beer's rise in Japan that I find slightly amusing. Industry researchers observed that people started drinking non-alcoholic beer on the bullet train because the train journey felt like the right occasion for a beer, but they didn't want to arrive at their destination having drunk alcohol. The occasion stayed, the alcohol left. The product adapted to fill the gap between what felt right and what was wanted. That gap is now much larger than a bullet train journey. It runs through the izakaya, the bonenkai, the office welcome party, the whole architecture of nomadication. Japan is not giving up on the gathering, it is giving up on the requirement that the gathering be built around alcohol. The beer companies have noticed. The employers, more slowly, are catching up. The izakayas, many of which have been expanding their non-alcoholic menus for several years now, are adapting too. What's disappearing is not the drinking party. It's the idea that communication required alcohol to happen, that hierarchy could only loosen under the influence, that you had to be slightly compromised to be honest with your colleagues. Whether something is lost in that, or whether it was never worth keeping in the first place, probably depends on who you ask, and how old they are. As for me, I'll keep the craft beer bar directory running. There's still plenty of demand. It's just sitting alongside something it didn't used to have sitting alongside. A generation that has decided, with no particular drama, that it's quite happy with the oolong tea. That's the Tokyo Bill Weekly for July 11th, 2026. I've been, and remain, Tokyo Bill. Thank you for listening, and kanpai.